I like how we call them citizen scientists, and citizen designers. I mean, it's all this idea of citizens coming together. These were great presentations, and we seem to pretty much come together to a similar idea of what designers and artists can do when working with scientists. Perhaps, William, you're the only one that talked about designers making things beautiful. And you know what? You're not wrong. I mean, the people that are here are thinking of beyond beauty, but beauty is a form of communication. So, Daisy, you called it synthetic aesthetics, and you used the word aesthetics, which we haven't used much tonight. We talked about ethics more. So can you explain that title and the role of aesthetics in this new field?
A post-it note, that was the origins. So synthetic aesthetics was actually funded out of a very strange circumstance, a sandpit where 30 leading synthetic biologists and 2 social scientists got together and were locked up in a hotel for 5 days, and with a prize of $10 million on day 5. And 5 new projects came out of that, science projects, and one of them was synthetic aesthetics. But I think it's a really good point, is that we don't touch on aesthetics in the project. We had a philosopher on board, and he was very angry that we, one of the research fellow, that we weren't talking about true aesthetics. And for me, a lot of my work in terms of sort of the way things look is about using the aesthetic of biology, like squishy slugs or poo or things that actually make us like a visceral reaction. And
I would say use aesthetics as a form of communication. I mean, which is the form in which it's used in nature. It's a way to communicate various signals to the same species or to other species, and sometimes it might be about that. David, you want to say something? Is the other designer here?
Well, I think like with a lot of technologies, there can be a lot of aesthetics. So one thing that we were interested in doing in the MoMA PS1 project was saying, well, maybe we can use biology to grow these new parts, but maybe these parts don't have to look like the biology that is the stereotype of biology. So I think there are lots of versions and flavors, and probably like all design projects, I mean, part of the art and science of it is putting together the ingredients in a way that's interesting conceptually, that's arresting visually, and I think there are a lot of ways to do it. I don't think there's one aesthetic for all of biodesign projects.
William, do you wear a lab coat when you work? Don't worry, it's gonna go on. Yeah.
Okay, I've kind of moved on from the bench, but so the way that I'm still connected on an intimate level with the research is that I'm designing the structures. So we have CAD-like programs to design the structures, and so I'm intimately related with the experiments without necessarily doing every single step. I think one thing that would be interesting to engage the community is having remote experimentation, so people can upload their designs, and then at some kind of specific installation, those are actualized. And we can see some of this community-based science in action. There's one effort that started at University of Washington by David Baker, in which he calls it Fold It. I don't know if you guys have heard of this, but basically engages video gamers from around the world to help solve problems in protein folding and protein design. So they had a recent competition to try to design a better protein vaccine. And so they got these video gamers to try to design it. And then one of the treats is that they'll look at the best designs and they'll actually test it in the laboratory. So I think this is going to be an exciting new way to engage the community and do better science at the same time.
Definitely a better way to engage video games than Gamergate. That's good. But do you ever get into any kind of discussion with designers and artists in your work?
So one of our visiting fellows is Chuck Hoberman, who's a designer.
Chuck, yes.
So
Chuck, are you here? No, because he might be here, but not tonight. Yeah.
Yeah, so he's a visiting scholar. He's been teaching a class at Harvard School of Design. And so we've been sitting down a bit to try to see if we could implement his expanding structures into DNA. And one difficulty that we've run into is I made it sound like everything just works right away and it's wonderful. but it's a process. So self-assembly is a very noisy enterprise, and our own bodies are very noisy, and so there's lots of mistakes made. In order to scale to much more complicated structures than what I showed you, we need to come up with tricks in order to bypass those errors, which our bodies have done. So we have all kinds of mechanisms to clean up the accidents that are just a byproduct of self-assembly. So we haven't quite gotten there yet, but it's a very interesting dialogue, and I find it invigorating.
So there's great firepower in the audience. Besides asking you to ask questions, I would like, Andreas, would you tell us how Modern Meadow is doing and how your in vitro leather and meat are going? Sorry for putting you on the spot, but this is the purpose.
Sure. Thank you. So we just moved to New York, so we're newcomers to Brooklyn. We started the company 3 years ago to develop a new way to grow materials, leather, and also foods and cultured meat. And we've been making great progress. So Paula, you were one of the first to taste steak chips, which is one of our early products in cultured meat. It's not $300,000, but we've been making some improvements on that as well. And what's probably closer to market is our materials. We're developing leather materials that are in some cases more biomimetic and in some cases less biomimetic. And by designing leather from the ground up, we can make materials that have entirely novel design and performance characteristics.
And do I understand that you're one of the very first companies to actually have commercial application of in vitro materials outside of the scientific community and medical community?
Right. Yeah. We are one of the first companies to apply tissue engineering techniques around mammalian cell culture and biofabrication beyond medicine. I actually have a few colleagues here tonight. Is Sarah Sklarczyk and Suzanne Lee, and who else is here? Okay, if you guys can just kind of wave your hands. So we've got an incredible team, and it's a very unique kind of combination of designers and scientists.
Thanks a lot. So I'm going to start seeing if there's questions from the audience or comments, because there's many people that are invested deeply in the world of synthetic biology. Anybody? Because I have many questions to ask, but yeah, over there. If you can introduce yourself also when you speak.
Thanks. My name's Nicholas Felton. I'm a designer, and so I'm curious about these design fictions and how the designers see putting out pessimistic versus optimistic visions, and whether there's potential danger in putting out pessimistic visions that you personally find troubling, but might be inspiring to other groups, just because these can function as such a creative seed.
Daisy, this is for you.
It's a really good question. I don't know the answer. I mean, I've gone back to do a PhD to actually look at this because, I mean, the question of critical design and design fiction, and I think it really erupted on the Design and Violence blog in the last few months as well, about what is the role of this kind of work. And even the Slug, which had a couple of appearances this evening, for me, I see it as really critical. And when I've shown that project to synthetic biologists, I ended up in an argument with someone for an hour over that project, and how I was doing a real disservice to the science because it looked so utopian, because the big image of the project is like a whole forest that's got synthetic animals all the way through. It's rewilding with synthetic biology. But the whole project is described in terms of patent descriptions, and the only text that accompanies it is patent applications, so they're machines. And I was accused that I was promising a future that was never going to be achieved, that synthetic biology won't save nature, and at the same time, as a designer, it was misleading because it looked so real. And from the design community, everyone thought it was great, but is it an aesthetic investigation? What would it be like to design a slug? It was really fun to design a slug. We had doing technical drawings of a slug. That's also very fun. But I don't know if it's a good idea anymore, and I'm now at a point where I'm really wondering, and having curated that show where we had all those different kinds of projects that have very different effects, and it's very hard to put them alongside each other. And I know that you had the same problem in Design the Elastic Mind with the meat.
But I think that sometimes people describe this sort of design. I use the word homeopathy or irritants. When you need an irritant to stimulate a reaction that then sets you in the right path. I always believe that designers, or in most cases, almost take a Hippocratic oath. You know, they're moving in one direction. So even when they're deeply negative or dystopian, they do it so that there will be a positive reaction, or ultimately a positive reaction. Now, that is a methodology that is more creative and artistic than it is scientific. So some scientists might seem or feel irked by it, but some others instead have embraced it and have initiated collaborations that are ways to find degrees of freedom. So you'll always find the naysayers, but even just your 1 hour argument about the slug is a good thing. I don't know, Adam, are you still here? Oh, no, I thought they might have gone. But when we did Design the Elastic Mind, there was a lot of first encounters of the sixth kind, you know, and some collaborations actually happened, and there were discoveries, especially for the scientists. Do you have anything?
Yeah, my sense is that the first thing that gets lost is the artist's intention, and then the piece has a life of its own.
What the artist's intention gets lost?
Well, it gets lost as the art gets co-opted into the broader community, meaning that the artist's intentions gets dropped by the person who's conveying that image. And
Maybe that was the artist's intention.
I mean,
sometimes yes, sometimes no. In this case, I
designing
think
for the
it's
sixth
no.
Extinction was, for me, a slightly different kind of project because it wasn't a collaboration. It was a response to a conference that happened last year where the ecology community and conservation community initiated a meeting with the synthetic biology community for the first time, looking at whether these two fields were opposed or actually had something in common. And that project was a direct response. So a lot of the language I was using was responding to quite technical discussion in that meeting. So it operated very differently, I think, towards the public and towards the field, and that's something.
William, how do you feel? No need to be courteous. Like, how do you feel when you see these kind of dystopian design fiction projects that deal with science?
I think it depends on how it's framed. So, I mean, of course, we're inundated with these kind of visions from media. So we're accustomed to seeing radical things. Oftentimes we see science greatly butchered in films and in popular media. So I think we're basically acculturated to it. So I don't really see a threat to it. If it can help to stimulate thinking about the science, then I think that's a really, really great discussion to have.
Does it happen?
I mean, I think so. So let me give you an example. There's somebody who's been very prominent with the word nanotechnology. His name is Eric Drexler. I don't know if any of you guys have heard of him. Yeah. And he came up with this vision that was basically, 100 plus years away in terms of what we'd actually be able to do in the laboratory. And his argument was, well, someday we'll be able to do this. So I'm going to imagine what if we can, and all these things that are going to come out of it. And so he was criticized a lot because people would say, well, you haven't really provided a path to this, so what's the point? But I know personally I was inspired by his visions, and I'm sure there's lots of other scientists who are inspired, and they don't necessarily go and try to do it literally the way that he prescribed, but they might try to take some other steps along the way. I think synthetic biology is a really great example of basically of inspiring people with metaphor and with passion. So we have this generation of new scientists who are now thinking about the idea of using biology for doing useful things. So I think the key point is that scientists are humans, and in terms of fallibility, and we don't always do the thing that's the most interesting or the best. Oftentimes we do things because we're used to doing that way. And traditionally in biology, we haven't had the capability to engineer it the same way we can computers. And so now that we have the ability to do it, people aren't used to that. So the gut reaction of the old guard, if you will, is why bother? That's not biology. But what happens with all fields is not that the old guard changes their mind, but they retire, and then the new wave comes in. And so we basically, with this vision of synthetic biology and all the ideas associated, we basically train the next wave of young scientists to basically decide to have that passion for this particular direction. I mean, even when there's something that there's a clear case where some kind of technology will work. So if we say, okay, I'm going to develop this new technology that will solve the energy crisis. So scientists have this funny behavior where since most of the ideas they hear are crap, so their gut reaction to anything is that's not going to work. And oftentimes they won't bother to think about it until you've really dotted the I's and crossed the T's. So that's one way to get people to think about it, is actually get it to work. But I think a second way is to inspire their passions in other ways by exciting their imaginations.
Yeah. So are you involved in iGEM?
I've mentored a team in the past. I'm involved with judging a related competition called Biomod, also held in Boston, that's more related to structures and machines outside of the context of the cell. So it's very similar to iGEM, just slightly different focus.
Now, Dan, the citizen scientist, who comes to GenSpace and what do they do? What do they want to do?
I'm sort of looking in the audience, and I see some here. There's one. There's one. It's pretty impressive. We get bartenders, and then we get computer scientists, and then we get PhD biologists.
So do they want to do molecular cuisine? That's what they...
So GenSpace's BSL-1 is a biosafety level 1 facility, so anything that you're going to make, you're also not going to eat. Oh. However, although we did do a beer brewing, but that's a little different. We have artists and designers who are making projects. So for example, Heather Dewey Hagward was doing her work at GenSpace, and then we have people who are doing pure science, basic science, trying to figure things out. I mean, it really runs the gamut. Anyone can come in, and their imagination is the limit. As long as it's safe, which it is, they can run wild, and they do, and it's just exciting to watch. I mean, we have a kombucha biotech chair sitting in our lab. It's this big, but yes, it is a biotech chair.
David, what you showed, the approximate design that is then filled in by the algorithm and by the optimization of materials, taking into account manufacturing, and so on and so forth, and then you pick aesthetically. It's so beautiful. It's such a great metaphor to the way we will build in the future. Which will be the first application? I don't think it's going to be the damn chair. You know, like design is always equated to a chair. What do you think is going to be the first application beyond the chair?
I think that's a good question, and I'm hesitating in part because I have to pick my words carefully. I'm involved in a confidential project that is.
Oh my God! I've touched the confidential.
That is, but it's relevant, I think, to note that it's a funded project by major industry. I know that's very vague. But I think I can also say, without getting into trouble, it's aerospace. And it's just to say that although this approach, you know, to me it holds the promise of a lot of interesting things in the future. The initial applications, such as the chair and the first aerospace application, won't be as radical or as interesting. But I think one of the things that I've liked about working on that project and developing some of the tools along the way is that they can be expanded really easily to achieve more interesting things. In other words, like I described,
it should be almost scale indifferent, right?
Yeah,
by
it should be
nature.
scale indifferent, and even you know, manufacturing technology indifferent. If we can enter in the constraints of manufacturing, in this case, it's 3D printing in metals, and so there's certain diameters that you can print or not print, and there's certain geometries that work with without a scaffold structure, which becomes problematic because you can't chip it off. In plastics, you can dissolve it off. But the nice thing is that you can take a different manufacturing technology, or the 3D printing 10 years from now, or robotic construction 10 years from now, or construction by silkworms or something, and you can input those constraints into the model. And one of the reasons I wanted to show that here is that the hybrid, to me, is what's so interesting, that it's not just biology, it's not just computational design. It's this kind of hybrid, and for me that's exciting as a designer to think that we just have this bigger palette now. Like a lot of new worlds are being opened up by things as diverse as machine learning and synthetic biology, and putting them together in new ways seems super exciting.
I would like to ask you about fear and kind of repulsion. How many of you would easily eat a piece of in vitro meat? Well, of course, my audience, of course, it's kind of self-selecting. And, you know, I was thinking about the European aversion to GMOs, which is not necessarily politically motivated, but it's more like instinctually motivated. I mean, it's also political, but I'm interested in the instinctual repulsion. And it's very interesting to find the threshold where one can get. Is anybody able to talk to that in particular? Maybe Daisy, have you looked?
It's the thing that fascinates me the most. It's how I first started looking at synthetic biology. Is why did I find it unnatural, and what irrationality was so deep in me that even though I still find the science so exciting and work with synthetic biologists, and I'm probably part of the synthetic biology community, would be fair to say, but I still have a problem with this idea of engineering things that are bigger than, you know, bacteria. There's a strangeness to this idea, and the more I understand it, the more my fears are around the kind of social, ethical, social, political, and economic things around genetic modification. But there is something, when you get past the cuteness factor, that it is, you know, something gets a bit bigger, then you can start to see it, that it feels unnatural. And
you would drink your probiotic yogurt for the chroma. You would use it.
Not that now it's funded by DARPA.
DARPA is good.
DARPA is good, but the fact that internal surveillance is a very, very strange paradigm. If that is the paradigm, that it is that there are no secrets. It's very strange how much we are, you know, there's a very well quoted statistic that our own bacteria outnumbered our own cells are outnumbered 10 to 1 by bacteria, and we, you know, there's a lot of research going into even how bacteria are telling us what to eat and controlling our mood. So the idea of engineering your microbiome, I think, is even more significant than anything we've ever realized, because it could alter our mood, it could alter our behaviors, and these are the discussions that really really fascinate me from a design perspective, because it's about irrationality and desire and things that, you know, hypocrisy. I mean, I think I work in genetic modification, and I'm nervous of it, and that's a perfect example of where good design comes from, is this feeling of uncertainty. And I don't really know how we resolve it. I don't think there are, you know, genetically engineering corn is probably a good idea, but then looking at how that works in a much bigger ecosystem, that's kind of fundamental to it, is that none of these designs operate in isolation.
Yeah, it's complex systems. Dan, you were itching to say something.
Yeah, I was interested in our use of the word natural, which I sort of feel uncomfortable with. I feel like that term has now blurred so much, at least in my personal understanding. Right, we as humans have been altering our world since we've gotten onto the planet. Nothing around us is natural. I mean, look where we are in this auditorium.
What?
It's natural-ish.
It's green.
Yeah. But I mean, even out in the environment, the things that we plant around us, those species of plants, they don't necessarily quote unquote belong where they are, and yet we design our environment.
No, that's why what David said to me is one of the most important things to understand. We are in a hybrid situation constantly, and ambiguity is a state that we need to become comfortable with, and at the same time we need to be conversant with complex system theory so that we can understand the consequences of our moves, because things are not as clear-cut as they used to be when our grandmothers were growing up. Maybe it will be even more in the future, but I think that synthetic biology and the coming together of design and science is about trying to deal with all this. Is there anybody that's either a philosopher, an ethicist, or a religious person in the audience? No. I have, oh yeah, who's that? You're getting a microphone. So these issues were not considered. Say more.
I don't know. Did any of that get heard, or should I repeat it?
Oh yeah, repeat it, please.
So I'm not sure that I would consider myself to really have earned any of those titles that you suggested, but technically on paper I do have a degree in bioethics from Harvard University, which I got. It's an undergraduate degree, and I had to twist their arm to let me study that because I went to Harvard just after Dolly the Sheep and the Human Genome Project, and I saw these issues that were already on the scene and certainly more to come as issues kind of fraught with all sorts of questions that were philosophical, religious, legal, and I really thought that Harvard and other schools should offer courses of study in these areas. So I had to actually do an independent major because it's not a regular major that they offer.
But this has to be part of the recipe to discuss ambiguity, I believe. I think we have time for one more question, if anybody's itching to ask. Yeah, you have? Over there, the very last far edge. Always introduce yourself, please.
Hi, this is Natalie Dermogenko, and I'd like to pose the question about respond to the ambiguity, or what I would call the irreducible complexity that is involved in synthetic biology, that really demands that we address synthetic ecology, which I think Daisy's, which doesn't, I think, Paola, you said that if we understand complex systems, we will be able to understand the consequences. But
big conversant understanding is a little too.
Yes, exactly.
tall.
I mean that to address the common good, or to address the great environmental challenges that we face with the technical and biological opportunities that we have, means really articulating what synthetic ecology is and understanding synthetic biology always and already in the context. And yet that can be daunting. It is daunting. And yet I'd like to hear what is the proxies for the common good that people do use that allow you to work. And I'd have to sort of say just very briefly that I think ethics is not one of them. I think ethics is outside of design work, outside of research work, and can't function usefully to create and inform what we do. Right? It's not a discussion that you can have outside of the active choices in making sense of what you're doing and why you're doing it. So the question is, what is the proxy for the common good? What in this kind of irreducible complexity of working that really does guide what you're doing?
It's a good question to answer, India.
It is. I don't know the answer to the question, but I mean, my colleague Jane Calvert has written a really wonderful paper about the sustainability imaginary of synthetic biology, and which references the fact that there is so much discussion of it being sustainable, but no definition of what that actually means. And that is kind of at the heart of this discussion, I think, is that there is an ambition that it could do the right thing, but no one actually has defined it. And that is a space where, the complexity of ecological systems and the complexity of what is the common good. I mean, we can tell already that there's a lot of different viewpoints in the audience about, for example, the in vitro meat. What is a beef farmer going to think of in vitro meat, or what is someone who is a vegetarian, or the vanilla farmer that was referenced earlier, the Madagascan vanilla farmer. The idea of vanilla growing in a vat in California is not a good thing. And so what the common good is something that, there is no common good, but how we even get to that point is perhaps a space where design could help define things, but I don't think we'll be doing it on our own.
Dan?
I think that Natalie makes a good point that as synthetic biology moves closer to a reality, we need to start really thinking about ecosystems. And I think ecologists have been largely absent from the conversation.
I'm sorry, what ecologists?
Ecologists.
You had them in your big round for the summit, right? You had them there.
I do.
Yeah, yeah.
I think they're really important to me. So yes, so I think they need to be part of the conversation. We need to understand that whatever we manipulate out in the world, anything that really replicates, could potentially, there's risk involved, could potentially get out of the lab. But also we need to be aware that it exists in, whatever we engineer also exists in an ecosystem. It's not even clear when you talk to ecologists how it functions in that ecosystem, and each individual organism functions differently, and if you might take it out of the ecosystem,
Right.
you might change the ecosystem. So these are all huge questions that we are sort of barreling towards, but don't really have answers for. And so I think also, let me just finish. The other thing that as a public we're going to have to get used to is risk. That there's risk in whatever we're going to do, and there's going to have to be ways that we mitigate those risks as we move forward.
I just want to add that, I mean, I think all of that makes sense, and I've been thinking a lot about designing ecosystems as well. I think that's really an important challenge for designers of this time. But I think it should be noted that the do-nothing approach, the hands-off approach, is also risky. I mean, it's not like we have this choice between, intervening, thinking about it, working it through, applying the best of our hybrid technologies, and doing nothing. I mean, we do have that choice, but it's not so easy.
Yeah, no, nothing. I mean, obviously, as someone who started one of these labs, nothing is not an option. But I just think we need to get the ecologists in the room, and that's only now starting to happen.
William? Yeah.
Just to reiterate a point made earlier that, we're already doing a really good job disrupting our environment by pollution, by overfishing. Of course, we need to pay attention to things that could disrupt on an even faster time scale, but there's no such thing as doing nothing. We're already doing something.
Well, the common good is the crucial, central part of your question that resonates with me, and it's very hard to define it in a way that is like universal. What I think is important as a curator and not as a designer or scientist is to give every single person the critical tools to be able to participate in the definition of the common good, and then be able to have the kind of literacy and the voice to go back to designers and scientists and make them become citizens and not only designers and scientists. So truly, it's a great shared experimentation that we're all going through, and of course transparency is important, even though sometimes secrets are necessary, huh, David? but I think that tonight was such an exciting moment to rekindle the love for design and science and the love that design and science have for each other. And I hope that you will stay for drinks, and actually I have to say the drinks were offered by 3 people that are not here tonight. Unfortunately, Carl Bass and Carlos Olguin and Andrew Hessel from Autodesk, and they have been working on big structures and small structures, and we've asked them for help just to get you some wine and nuts, and they were there for us. But I'm so happy that you came tonight, and I hope this conversation will continue outside tonight and then outside in the real world, and that you will all stay in touch with us. Thank you very much, and thank you.